been obviously not a full-time job. There we go, recording in progress. Obviously not been all I've been doing for that time, but it's been on and off project for about 1.5 years right now to create the document that is going to be published in sometime soon. And we're going to get the short version of it today. And also starting to do some practical work on it in the end of this session. So I look forward to that, and let's get started here. Take the next slide as well, Julie. There we go. So basically what we're going to do today here is align a few things and try to create some common language and some common kind of facts about technique. It might seem like a bit of a reach, but I think we have some good grounds based off of research and best practice to create some base layer of what we consider to be a good technique. And I'm going to take you through how we got there, a little bit of method, a little bit of the theory behind, and also going through what we have created here, which is this technical report card that we have referred to. So basically super simple startup here, just like based there on how we're kind of going by here. So there's two ways to ski faster. It's actually that simple. You either increase your cycle length or you have a higher tempo or cadence, or obviously a combination of the two. It's actually straight out physics, and it's actually good to kind of break it down that simple every now and then, because obviously, and we're going to get to it in a second, there are different ways to create that power to get a bit longer cycle length, or obviously just like train for kind of exercise to become maybe more explosive or something like that, to have a higher tempo. But in the end, it's actually that simple if you think about it mechanically. Next slide, please, Julie. So the more maybe, oh, we're going fast. There we go. So next question then, which was based off of, okay, longer cycle length, higher tempo, or in theory, a combination of the two. How do we train towards that? Well, we can improve our fitness. We can get more energy potential, VO2 max, and stronger. And we can be smarter. We can do better kind of pacing of our races and everything. And obviously, we can improve our technique, which would basically mean use energy more effective. So we can either increase our total energy package, get fitter to make it sound simple, or improve our technique, use the energy we have more effectively. Obviously, we try to do both all the time, but the focus here in this document is to approach this improved technique or use the energy the smartest way possible. Next slide, please. So what we're going to try to answer today is basically what is good technique and why that is. We're not going into a lot of how, meaning how to train for that. So exercises or different focuses time of year. This might be a different discussion we have to have at a different webinar or a different time. We are going into what is good technique and why is that. Just so we have some clear goals of what this document and this report card is addressing. So we have basically two methods that is used in science to kind of detect what we consider good technique. And they're quite simple, actually. So we're either measure effectiveness or energy used, which would be in the lab. It's almost always measured in VO2 usage. So basically, you are on a roller ski treadmill and you're doing a set speed, a set incline, and obviously they have measured the resistance in the wheels and the wheel set in the skis, and you use a certain amount of energy or VO2 in this case. If the incline and the speed is consistent, obviously the better skier or the better technical execution will actually use less energy. So if you had a group of 10 people doing exact same thing, the athlete using the least VO2 would probably be the most effective skier, probably divided by by kilo weight, obviously, since a much bigger skier will use more energy, but it might also have bigger energy potential. So that's one way to do it, and just kind of get a very quantifiable number of like, this person used the least amount of energy. Let's kind of analyze what he or she does, and that's probably a good way to go. Or the more normal, I would say, the more used way normally, which is register/observe what the best do. It can be both in the lab and the field. So basically what you do is that you take the group, let's say number 1 to 10 in a race, either if it's NORAMs or maybe the World Cup. Most of the theory is done on FIS points, so as good a skier as you can, World Cup level for the best group, and maybe some kind of control group on a more domestic level for another country. And you basically take number 1 to 10 on the World Cup, you register different positions, different cadence, different whatever, and you assume that whatever average they have is probably a better way to go than, for example, the group of number 4 to number 50. Obviously, hypothetically, this has flaws. It might be that they're all just fitter and their technique is not actually better at all. Hypothetically, then, of course, if they're doing the same thing, you would see that they're doing the exact same thing, which is not the case. And we will then assume again that they're not doing a worse job technically than number 4 to 50, and they're that much fitter that they're compensating through that. So there's obviously always an evolving thing of trying to pick the right pieces of what is actually a better way to go, what is just randomness, and what is maybe even things that could be done better. But we obviously think that the group of the best people are doing things more effectively than a group of the second best athletes. Can be done in the lab, also on roller skate treadmill, measuring stuff and everything and kind of group them in, or it can be done in the field just by basically even just videotaping a race and comparing them and measuring whatever you want. I guess in theory it can be as much as we have done research where you literally go through a whole race and count the number of times they set down their poles in the whole thing, how many times they change their technique during a 15K, how many times is that happening back and forth, several hundred times, if you didn't know. So there's plenty of things we can look at, but these are the two methods to go by. Next, please. Based off of those two methods, we have kind of summarized some of them into literature where we have a few things that we consider to be facts, or at least have been proven several times in literature. So we think they are a good way of saying this is what we know is consistently done by the best athletes, and we think this is something all athletes should chase in their technique, even if there are individualization. If someone has any questions during this whole process, feel free to ask, even just unmute yourself, or ask in the chat box. I might not always be paying attention there, but I assume both Stephen and Julie can help me, maybe remind me that there now is a question in the chat box that I should kind of look to or something. So use either the chat box or unmute yourself, and I'll answer question during here if I'm not being clear enough during all this. Anyways, the first principle we're gonna just look at here that we have found in literature that we're gonna base a lot of what we're seeing later on off of is the best athletes simply are moving their center of mass less than the second best athletes, meaning they're basically moving up and down less than the second best athletes. So what does that mean? Well, obviously moving mass up and down costs energy. You have to use quite a bit of energy to do that, and the best athletes are able to ski as fast as they do, doing literally that less. So we've seen this even in these two simple pictures. For some reason, the picture to the right became a little bit small, but you all see it. Literally, when you're standing up tall, obviously your center of mass becomes quite high, and when you lean down, it goes down. So the further down you lean down or kind of bow over, it will go even further down. And the best athletes manage to keep their pace high even through standing quite tall through that whole process and not go too much up and down. It's pretty simple in a way to kind of understand the principle of why that makes sense. I would say it causes energy to go up and down. So let's try to limit that without obviously make it sacrifice the speed you need to create, which will need a certain amount of movement. The second one, if we move to the next slide, is sequential muscle activation, large joints to small joints. I'm going to use an analogy from another sport before I kind of wrap it into cross-country skiing, just to start it off. In track and field, you have the disc thrower. And basically what that disc thrower is trying to do is trying to create a big of a momentum arm as possible to throw that disc as far as possible. And what he's doing is literally using his entire body and almost trying to make a whip-like motion with his arm to create that big momentum arm. He's using his shoulder first. He then activates his elbow, and he then even takes a little bit of wrist into it. Obviously, even before that, he has his entire torso used, and hip and everything. He's using a sequential muscle activation there to kind of create this motion where this can create as much possible force into that disc, versus if he just activated everything at the same time, it would just be this small choppy movement. But he's actually using everything like that to kind of create a big whip motion. Now, we're not creating a whip motion in cross-country skiing. My point with that example was basically that we sometimes can actually create a bigger power output by having a certain order of how things are kind of put out, and we use that in cross-country skiing as well. So if you picture a cross-country skier, let's just say double poling, it's a pretty simple movement to kind of picture in your head. And they're standing up tall at their tallest point in a cycle, and they're about to start a new cycle by setting down their pole plant. They will start by leaning forward through a little bit of using their hips. It will come down and will use their knees and then their ankles, right? It will be a certain order of this. They're not going to use all of those at the same time. It's going to be just after each other. So we have seen a certain activation order done in that's it, repeating itself. And the second best athletes might not be doing this. They have not been doing that the same consistent way in literature. So we see it's a very rapid hip, knee, ankle, shoulder, elbow movement in the best athletes, versus the second best athletes. Sometimes they're not even using their ankle. So they're maybe just doing hips, knee, and then they're basically sitting because they're not using their ankle. Or they might even be kind of having very, very, we're going a bit back and forth there. Might be using maybe a very locked in elbow and not even using that potential right there. So this sequential muscle activation is something we've been seeing that is a little bit different in the best athlete than the second best athlete. Next point, and we've seen, is a more ideal power curve. I'm going to explain the figure we're seeing in a second here. So just to start mechanically, to think about a pole that is going to push you forward. Ideally, if you just think about the pole, let's leave the athlete out of it for a moment. The most ideal angle that pole can have to push you forward is almost horizontal, because you're going forward, whatever pushes backwards will bring you forward. However, an almost vertical angle with your pole is not a very anatomically ideal position for you to push power into that pole. So we have to find some middle way here, right? So right away, when you're sitting on your pole, you're almost 90 degrees down to the surface, or sometimes even you are 90 degrees down to the surface with your poles. Basically, whatever you push straight down would just go straight back up into the air and won't really push you forward. However, we're already moving forward. So obviously your poles will actually have a more ideal angle to push with in a split second after they hit the ground, because you're already moving. what we have seen and we see in this figure is that strategy A, that it's kind of referred to here, set down their poles. As you can see, the start of this one, where this the A group is not the dotted line. The dotted line is the kind of split up line is the B group, and the A group, which is the preferred way, is starting with less impact force. So they're setting down their poles a little bit more carefully, determined, but not smashing it into the ground. And when that pole is in a little bit more ideal angle towards the ground, because it's moved backwards and you're moving forwards, they put in a huge amount of volume of force during that period when the angle is anatomically and obviously mechanically the most ideal, and that pushes them forward quite effectively. The B group here smashes their pole into the ground when all the force is basically just going straight back up into the air, and have almost used up the entire power potential before they're actually getting into a more ideal angle here, and they can't really push that much more power into it. So they're actually waiting for the perfect timing to push harder with their poles, the A athletes. The B athletes smashes their poles into the ground, and a lot of the power is already kind of used up. They're not able to use it in the more ideal timing of part of the cycle. So that's basically the third principle we're going to go through here. The best athletes have a better understanding of when to put in their force into their poles, but we also see this for the leg kick and push. Next principle is the preparation phase. Preparation phase is basically what we have seen is that in the best athlete, or the grouping of the best athletes, they have more time with the poles in front of them than the second best athletes. So just think about that for a second. So it basically means that the best athletes are getting their poles back in front of them, ready to charge or go into the next pole plant, and have more time they're spending in front of the poles in front of them than behind them than the second best athletes. The second best athletes kind of completes the pole push too far, and they almost have to stumble, if you want, into the next one. The poles are almost not making it in time in front of you to kind of catch you when you're kind of following forward. However, the best athletes, as we see a very simplified example of in these three pictures, are actually spending a little bit of time with their poles in front of them before that pole actually hits the ground. And it's coming from, as you see in the middle picture here, those poles are basically ready to be set down. They're vertically already, and the poles are coming straight from above into the ground, not coming from behind and basically splashing snow forward. It's a very typical visual thing you can see with athletes who's not maybe nailing this, is that the pulse is coming from behind, and you can see a lot of splashing even forward with in the snow, at least when conditions allow that. So the best athletes literally have more time than the second best athletes in front of them to time that pole plant way more carefully. And they probably have also, what we can at least see in some research, because of that, they have a split second there where blood flow is a lot better, because basically they are relaxing for a little bit of a split second there before they again work hard. Versus the second best athletes, they push too far back and they have to literally work way harder on their way back again to start the next pole plant, and they work through the pole push, and they work to reposition themselves back up, and so on. So they're working all the time back and forth. The best athletes create this rhythm where they actually get a split second where they're just preparing themselves, blood flow is good, and then they charge into the next pole plant again. And these are the main 5. There's a couple of others as well that kind of merges into these, but these are the 5 we're going to focus on the most here today on these principles. So basically we're moving less up and down. That's the more ideal way, or at least a more energy effective way of skiing. They have a certain order of things on how they're going. They're not using everything at once. They're kind of moving into it in a sequential order. They have a power curve, which is very centered around when you have a good angle towards the ground. That goes for a push in skate, that goes for a kick in classic, but it obviously also goes for when you put force into the poles in any technique. And you have a preparation phase. You have this split point in every cycle where you're kind of just timing the next startup of a pole plant. You're not really stumbling into it all the time, and you get this split second to really time that perfectly and also get some blood flow because your muscles are relaxing or at least the working muscles are relaxing for a split second there. That's the 5 pillars of things we see again and again in the best skiers. The only exception I want to mention is if your only goal is to go as fast as you can. And listen to that carefully, because like, oh, aren't we doing that all the time? No, we're really not. We are trying to go as fast as we can over 5K, 10K, or even a prologue, right? If you are not worried about blowing up, which would, for example, be obviously into the finish. If you are moving up and down, you obviously have a lot of energy potential there. Even though you're using a lot of energy, you're not saving it for anything if the finish line is right over there. If you're getting there first, no one cares if you use more energy than the one next to you. So there are a bit different rules. If someone in your group is winning the speeds you're having, they might be other things to, like they're doing something right there, but it costs a lot of energy. So they need a different way to maybe master the entire prologue, and obviously different distances that are way longer. But for maximum sprinting up to the finish line, we don't really care that much about overusing energy. If you have it, by all means use it if it gives you a little bit extra speed. However, using that from a start and a prologue, you're probably going to blow up. So it's just the few times where you're not worried at all about pacing out your energy that some of these rules can be broken if it makes you ski faster. I'm not saying they're opposites. I'm just saying if you're winning that sprint and it's just 100 meters left, I don't care if you use more energy. If you won the sprint, you did something right there. But it might be a little bit aggressive start to the race if you used a lot of energy just going up and down, for example. Anyways, let's do next slide. So a little bit blurry, sorry about that. But I think you all have it as well. And this will be in a document later on, but we have created a technique report card based off of the principles that we just went through, and we're going to go through more carefully in a second here. So basically on top here, on top of that blackish line quite far up, we have all the different techniques we have all the different specific techniques within classic and skate. So we have the red category here, that's the skate one, not classic one, and then we have the skate one to the right, which is the blue one. Again, separated into striding, kick double pull, and double pulling for classic, and offset 1 skate and 2 skate for the skating. To the left, we see some categories that are again divided into body position and timing. And you have then an A, B, C list that we're going to go through in a second, that they're also split into. Up here, then to the right, we will then be able to set a ranking. Numbers, and we get back to the scale a little bit later on, but you basically put in a number of how well that athlete is skiing at that exact part of that technique. The part that is taking the most space here, the further down one, is a more practical part of this technique report card, meaning that it basically is the more what are you working on. So maybe for striding, you would see there on body position, you would just write the letter B. A little bit further down, Julie, in the lower section on classic there, in the comment section, for example. So basically, you would first write body position. Maybe you're working on B, which would be the power line. We're going through in this in a second. And you have a very, very practical comment, which would be this athlete is moving their hip way far out from too far out from the side to side, need to stabilize up. It's a very practical piece. So at the far bottom here, it's basically a more practical piece of what is that athlete been given of instruction to work on right now. the more quantifiable number part of this that we're going to work on is the top part. And we're going to break this down in a second if this was a lot of not understanding what I'm referring to here. Let's go to the next slide. So basically, up in the left corner of what we just saw, which was a lot of information, we had this part right here, basic technique, we have called it. So we are basically split onto two main categories, body position and timing. So body position, you can imagine basically different pictures taken within a cycle of skiing, which would be still photo of, for example, a pole plant or the ski lift that we see referred to and see here. So it's almost like still photos is what I'm picturing in the body positions. The timing, very easily explained, would be how the rhythm of how you move between these pictures, basically creating a video, right? That's kind of how we broke it up. So which positions are you supposed to be in at the different times of a cycle? And the timing is basically when are you putting in the effort and a bit slower movement within moving through those positions, and they work hand in hand. So we're gonna always try to work on one body position and one timing piece at a time. So you go A, B, B, C, C. I'll explain more in a second, but we're gonna start with explaining what is this body position piece with A, power position, power line, and ski lift. What does those mean? Let's look at the next slide. Power position is basically that point where your poles or your pole tips are passing straight underneath you. In the picture that is kind of marked as correct here, it's approximately underneath you. I'm talking about under the boot somewhere. That area with the tip is basically what we consider the power position. So this position is actually something you go through no matter what technique you are. These pictures could hypothetically be even striding, because you don't know if in the next second one arm is stretching forward and one is going backwards, and the same with the legs. Obviously, they can be double folding. That's what they seem to be doing. But even if they're one skating, it will look pretty much like this at some point from the side before they then obviously start to stretch up and push to the side with their legs. This position is what I talked about earlier on in the more ideal power curve. This is the position you want to put the most force into your poles to be pushed forward. You have a pretty ideal angle with the poles towards the ground to actually push you forward. In a combination with anatomically, you can actually put some proper body weight into this position. So if it becomes earlier, you just push the pole straight down, and the power in theory are just bringing you up in the air, which doesn't bring you forward. Or if it's later, you're basically so forward lean that you're going to have problems putting your body weight into this. So this is the moment you're interested in putting the most power into your poles. So we see two typical examples of problems that athletes sometimes have. A little bit of a city version to the left here. In the center, we see a little bit of a too forward one, straight legs and very forward lean one. And to the right, we see simplified example of a more ideal position we want to see when the pole tips are underneath the athlete, underneath the boots of the athlete, which is both having an angle in the ankle, knee, and hip, creating a more or less, and not always exactly the same, but more or less same angle with the upper body and the lower legs. They're about the same angle. They're on purpose, not perfect here, because it never is like that. But if you see the two other examples here, you see that in the middle, the lower legs are almost straight up and down, and the very forward lean upper body. Opposite, where you see like the straight forward here, and then you're sitting back, basically creating that you have to, and your thighs are obviously just very far behind you, and it's hard to put your body weight onto those poles in the left example. That's the power position. Pole tips straight underneath you. That's the moment you want to put the most force into your poles, regardless of the technique, sub-technique. Next slide, please. Power line is basically looking at or picturing an athlete more from up front or in theory behind them. It can be both can be done. In this example, we're seeing athletes from in front of them. And here we are interested in basically is the power going straight through their body into the ground as effectively as possible, or do we have some leaks in that power line alignment? And if you see at the top example here, where we have top left one, we see an athlete who's a little bit caved in the knee. I would say that is the main cause probably. Also then resulting in the hips and the shoulders becoming not really level with the ground, and you have a little bit of a leak in that power line, basically. So this athlete is struggling with a knee that's kind of caving in, I would say, and should probably try to get that aligned up a little bit better, like the one we see on the right top example, that is having a good line between the nose, the knee, and the toe, basically creating a pretty ideal power line, I would say. See the same, it's just to create an example, understanding that we're talking about all sub techniques here in the bottom for probably a 1 skate or 2 skate example we're seeing down here, where the one to the left is kind of standing in the middle and will probably be on the inside of their ski all the time and probably have to just kind of woggle back and from side to side, versus the one to the right is standing in full balance, ideal power line, and would have a much more controlled way of choosing when to go push over back to the other leg again. So we see that this is 2 examples of this is something we will look at in all techniques, not just striding, even though that was a good example on top. We see it here in 1 skate as well, and I would go through all the techniques. That's the power alignment. We're looking for leaks in that line. Number C here, next slide, please, is a ski lift. I'll get back to double poling later on. So I know we don't lift the skis in double poling, which is the only technique we don't do that. I'll get back to that later on. But in every other technique, we'll lift our skis at some point. Obviously, you can see in these pictures, this is the exact moment it's about to be lifted. So the ski is not in this example supposed to be lifted, it's supposed to be the split second it's about to get lifted. So that is a body position we're looking at for C here. Is that a position that is ideal for basically creating the best gliding phase or next push on the other push or kick on the other leg? In the top example, we see an athlete to the left who has stayed with the kicking leg for too long. It's actually having too long of a contact time with, or contact length with the ground, basically ending up staying with that leg for too long, that is pointing to right now, and becoming behind, and the entire weight is coming behind the leg that is about to get all the weight, creating probably a quite city or too forward leaned kick on the next leg. On the right one, however, we see an athlete that has done, as we saw in the more ideal power curve, even for kicking, done a short but strong kick, and they're about to glide, but they're doing that by now lifting that kicking leg up into the air and gliding on a leg that is actually straight underneath them, ready to kick again on the other side. So they have used that ideal timing of kicking when they're straight underneath them to a little bit behind them, almost like running. And the gliding part is then coming with them lifting that ski up into the air instead of staying with it for too long and then creating a bad positioning before the next kick. The same we can see, or we can see a different example of what we will look for in the ski lift down at the bottom here. So to the left in the not ideal example, we see someone that has pushed probably a little bit too far to the back, and with a very straight, and then have become a very straight gliding leg that is supposed to kind of now soon create the power. So they kick too far back, becoming too forward leaned and very straight legged, versus the more preferred example here, kicking to or pushing to the side, standing over much more centered over their balancing foot position, and are way more ready to push back on that leg again, creating infinity loop of pushing back and forth, pushing them forward. Not ideal example, will not get much out of their legs. We just have straight legs kind of trying to push / kick behind them. The good example for skating here is pushing to the side and actually creating that forward motion. That's what we want to see. So ski lift moment, very much revealing if you're not doing, if you're about to kind of end up in a very in an unideal positioning.
I believe Larch has a question, Eric. I'm just gonna get
Oh,
you to
of
mute.
course. Perfect.
Eric, just on terminology, I totally understand what you're saying, but and obviously an advanced national team skier will get it, but on kids and or masters, I just wouldn't want them to think of lifting their ski. So I'm just wondering if the term, and you used it a lot, describing it, is kick or weight transfer. What I just and you what I'm meaning is I don't want somebody to like lift their knee to lift the ski unnecessarily in skate or classic, if that makes sense. I'll let you, if that makes sense to you, Eric, what I'm asking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we can chat, stay unmuted. So you're basically, are you asking me if I think they should lift their skis high, or just which joint is lifted, or what are your concern there? Sorry,
no, my concern is the terminology. If I tell somebody on, say, and I don't want them to lift their ski, so I'm just thinking that ski lift, I'm wondering if a better word or terminology would be where to kick or where to weight shift. Because yeah, ski lift to me, somebody could mean thinking like, again, I don't know if it's like, yeah, like I don't want to see this, like, you know what I mean? Like, obviously, yeah, I think you know what I mean. I don't want to lift or create an extra movement.
Gotcha. Yeah. Robin, what's your? Do you have some thoughts on that part? Like, we have to. The skis are obviously not in contact with the ground at all times. I think we agree on that. Like, they're not. They're
yeah, for sure.
Sometimes they're in the air. What do you think, Robin? Here, could there would ski lift be? Because I'm after that exact moment where it's leaving the ground. Just to start there, right? If I just involve you, Robin, could you help me out a little bit here? Obviously, again, English being my second language, it might also be wordings that I'm not hearing correctly. So what do you think, Robin?
I don't have a terminology for this because it's not a idea that we're giving people that to lift the ski. It's the point where the ski basically is a lift-off point from the snow. So it's, you know, zero gravity moment from the snow. I don't know, but I don't know why ski lift doesn't work, because if we explain it properly, it's a moment in time, not action.
Okay, no, that makes more sense, Robin. Yeah, and maybe I just got to wrap my mind around it is that weight transfer, it is that kick, and it is obviously coming off the ground.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I just got to wrap my head around that terminology.
I think, if I can just jump in, Roddy commented, he echoes sort of that thought, and I think Eric's point is that we're looking at a moment in time, and we're using that moment to assess a position. Thank you. And Roddy was also part of this, so bringing some context into it. But to what Robin just said, it's not necessarily a cue so much as a coach, what you're looking at that moment in time.
Yeah, no, that helps. Thank you.
That's actually, I've time to chat a little bit about that in general. It's a really good question. First of all, just so people know, if the terminology I use here is not random, like I didn't make up ski lift myself. However, if you're understanding what we are saying here, and you think you have because we have used a lot of time on really simple words here, or trying to make simple word, obviously. If you have like, maybe this is a better word for a simple description, you're understanding what we're saying, but like this maybe be hitting the mark a little bit better, please send that after. Like, that would be huge help. Obviously, we have created a lot of things there and used a lot of time, but these small details actually been used a lot of time on, and sometimes we might not have nailed it. I think we explained it properly here, and I agree that maybe the best way to explain it is the moment in time, not a good cue to give an athlete, because we're looking at that exact moment, when is it leaving the ground, and if that's too late, for example, in the striding example here, you are probably then way too far back with your weight. On the next kick, you are kind of behind all the time here. So we're looking at that moment to kind of single that out to analyze what can be done better. But it might not be a great cue to give them, because as you said here, Lark, you might start making at least not so experienced athletes to start lifting over obstacles that are not there, like over hurdles kind of movements, and we obviously don't want to see that happening. So it's a good kind of good feedback there, but at least for now, we're looking at the moment in time. Absolutely not a cue for an athlete. I would agree that was a good clarification. Thank you. Yes. Can we go to the next slide?
If you don't mind, I'll just jump in for 2 seconds, Eric. From an NCCP terminology standpoint, I think most of you will have learned this through your levels as the critical instant. That moment of balance / imbalance that the NCCP calls critical instant. So just a little bit of context there. We'll move.
Nice. So that was basically body position. We went through the power position. We went to which was basically when the poles are straight on the pole tips, are passing straight underneath your boot somewhere. The power line, basically seeing if your nose, knee, toe-ish out on each leg, versus if you have a little bit of an angle there somewhere, like we saw in the in-cave knee in the example. And we have the ski lift moment, where you see if they're kind of a very typical thing that is a problem is staying with the ground actually for too long and basically becoming too much in the middle in skating, or ending up way too far behind you, the weight point you should have in classic skiing. Now we're looking at the timing, which is basically, actually that's a good example of things we use a lot of time on. Should we go with timing or should we go with rhythm? But even both of those words were discussed. So I think both of that can be an example of, we're basically talking about the rhythm or the timing between those body positions that we're going through. All right, so let's look at the first one here, pole plant. Let's go to the next slide. Obviously, pole plant itself is one moment. That's more of a body position. I totally agree. We've called it pole plant. Oh, we went a bit far here. One back, please. Thank you. We are talking about, sorry, we went one forward again. There we go. We are talking about the movement around the pole plant. We called it pole plant, is underneath timing. So you have to kind of pay a bit of attention there. I know. I still think it's the best name for that area of timing. We're under timing. We're not just looking at one picture, which will be the picture 3 on your screen. That's the critical one, obviously, but it's kind of how you move into and out of that. So basically what we want to see here is what I talked a little bit about earlier, preparation phase. We want to come in with a very controlled timing to this moment, which you see in number 3 here, and number 4, which we see here, is basically the power position we saw earlier, right? This is the moment before that and the moment leading into this coming in the right way. Again, an example of something we see a lot, which would be less ideal, is finishing your pole plant so far behind you that you almost don't have time to get your poles back in position. And it looks like the athlete is almost stumbling forward, just not kind of hitting the ground, falling forward, because the poles just get there in time, smashing snow forward and all that good stuff. The athlete in this example we see is actually kind of reposition itself quite highly in number 1, and the poles are almost vertical already. In number 2, the poles are actually perfectly ready to go, but they're still kind of having this moment before it's set straight down, and the leg joints have compressed a little bit, as we see in picture 3 versus picture 2. So having this moment on top, don't underestimate seeing athletes having that split second where you just see them in control and then they start the next movement. If it's one skate, if it's even striding, just like having that moment versus just like always kind of struggling towards the next step. So having that kind of rhythm where you see them, it goes fast when they're going through the power position, which you see in picture 4 here. But at the top, just before the pole plant, it's actually quite calm. It's actually quite just split second, and there we go, split second, and there we go, versus always just chasing the next one. That's the pole plant part of timing, starting that pole plant with like full timing control versus just ending up in it all the time to not fall forward. That's A. Let's move to the next one. we have the leg kick and push. So basically what we're looking at here is, again, we're in timing, so it's throughout the whole kick/push. What we're seeing here is an example from skating. So I'm going to use the terminology push here, but I see kick as something we do in classic, kicking behind us. It's a short, fast movement, and push is a slower movement, and it's happening to the side, which we're doing in skate. So when we're pushing in this example, but it's the same for classic, we're looking at a little bit of the same thing we were looking at in the ideal power curve earlier on for poles. It's the same here. It's a quite short impact, and then it's just gliding out and having that ski lift, which would be in body position, but they're obviously linked, these two categories, right? So you're standing on one leg in one skate that we see here in picture number one. How just so that's being said, the number one pictures are supposed to be the same moment in time from the front and from the side. Number two, the same, and so on, right? It's not two different things going on here. It's just two different angles to look at it. So number one there is basically setting down that athlete's poles. And then that athlete is moving into a bit more of a power position in number two there for skate, a little bit longer poles than we saw in the example earlier, basically because it's skate poles and not classic poles for poling. And then moving over to through the push number three, and then basically having in number four here the ski lift basically, and five basically full glide, just with the ski that's just pushed up in the air. What we want to see here is quite a short effort. You have a strong push, but as soon as your body weight and your alignment, your power line, that's what power line was B in body position. As soon as your power line is over that next ski, you want to finish off and let that pushing leg go up into the air and weight off. If you stay with the ground in number four here for longer, you will basically become in the middle, right? You will not be in a balance on that new leg. So you want to do a short push, and it's done as soon as your alignment on the new leg with nose, knee, toe, as we see in picture number four. And we see the alignment obviously in the top picture, as we point to right now. That's when that push is done, and it's quite short. Most B athletes kick/push for too long of a time. They're spreading out their energy of a long time there, instead of the best athletes who's just putting it into that mostly ideal power input point where they have a better angle towards the ground, and they can still kind of position themselves ideally into the next leg glide, if you want to call it that. So typical problem, kicking, pushing for too long time, too long contact length, even if you want, or time, versus just a fast one and then you glide off. So it's power relax, power glide, power glide, power relax, right? That's what we're doing. That's leg kick push we're looking for. Last part of this timing cycle is what we call the recovery phase here. We're going to go to the next slide. So basically, it's as simple as the entirety of the time where the poles are in the air. Now, I know striding is a bit of an example that will not really fit into that, because it's the only technique where your poles are actually working 100% opposite of each other at all times. We're not going to go through every single technique today carefully. I'm just going to say that is obviously addressed in a document that is going to be sent out in a few weeks, where this is way more thoroughly gone through and you have time to see it yourself. However, a little bit of a spoiler there, we're looking at one side's preparation time or recovery phase, and one side's kind of pulling phase is happening opposite of each other at the same time. So it's a bit of an special instance. Other than that, all the other techniques, the poles have the same contact time all the time. So recovery phase is whenever the poles are in the air. Simple as that. That's recovery phase. What we're looking for here is basically creating an ideal way that's leading into that pole plant phase that we saw earlier. So everything is overlapping here, right? Pole plant, which was A, we still see on the top there, is basically starting already at picture number 4, leading into 5, leading into 6, which is the pole plant, and I showed what would be picture number 7 here, right, in the first example. So it's a phase. Then in the leg kick push, that will start already at the 5-6 part here and moving all the way into number 1 or 2 here. And then this recovery phase is going back and starting when you lift your poles at 1 and going all the way until you set your poles back down again at 6. My point being, these phases overlap. A will overlap with B, overlap with C, overlap with A, creating a cycle. It will always be like that. So it's kind of shifting when is A, when is B, when is C. They are on purpose kind of overlapping to create that total cycle of timing. What we're looking for here is basically stopping the moving backwards with your poles or your arms early enough for you to have time to get that time in front of you with the poles that we see in picture 4, 5, and 6. You want to have that time where your poles are actually kind of ready to go and you have full control of that new pole plant. And to do that, you can't really go much further down than the example we see number 1 here. If you keep on bowing forward in the example we see number 1 here to try to have even longer contact time with your poles behind you, you will have very, very limited time to get back into the next pole plant before you basically falling forward and becomes this never ending, just stumbling that I've said a couple of times now, stumbling into the next pole plant. So that recovery phase, we wanna start that repositioning part up towards the next pole plant early enough to not be late into the next pole plant. And basically, we're then not going as deep as we would have if we stayed longer with the poles, meaning we're moving our center of mass less up and down. We're putting in the ideal power, as much power as we can in the power position, and we're trying to then stay tall when we're not putting force into that split moment. That's the last bit. Next slide, please. I'm going to stop a second for asking questions. Oh yeah. However, we're going to look at a little bit. No, let's just pause for a second. Okay, so if you just pay attention to the left part there, I'm going to explain why it's circled out in a second over double folding here. But we have just gone through the body position, which is split down to ABC. We have gone through timing, split into ABC. This will constantly work together. But body positions are kind of still photos. Is your athlete sitting? It's basically sitting through the power position. That is a body position A problem. It's sitting. However, if it's stumbling into the next kind of pole plant all the time, you might have a timing A problem. They're really not getting enough time standing tall, having control of that pole plant. So we're trying to kind of identify where, okay, that athlete, something is not ideal. I can see that. Where is things kind of checking in, right? So you start with going through A looks good, B looks good, C looks good, or whatever. And we're going to kind of grade this later on. That's what we've just done. We've gone through what those 6 categories means, and you can apply them to all the techniques, sub-techniques. Double polling, which we're going to look a little bit further into right now. I'm going to look at it a little bit as an example, and you're going to work on it in groups, has some exceptions that I have kind of framed out in pink here. This is the only technique actually relevant to our question earlier on. It's the only technique where your skis never leaves the ground. Might be bouncing a little bit up and down and everything, and of course you can change direction, but if you kind of give them a little bit of a break here, they're not leaving the ground at any point in that cycle. So what is ski lift and leg push representing here? Because obviously we made a system that is kind of trying to explain it in a simplified way that kind of applies to all parts of the technique here. This is obviously a place where we have some exceptions. So for the ski lift, we are basically in double polling looking for the pole lift. That's why there's an exception there. We're going to just keep the lift and we're going to go with that moment where you lift your poles and if it's too far back, basically. And for the leg kick push, we are analyzing a bit more thoroughly that ideal power curve with the with the pole push. So keep the kind of push and the lift as your kind of reminder. I know it might be a bit confusing. You get used to it quite fast, and that's why I have framed out in pink. We're going to look at the pole lift instead of ski lift, just in double polling. That's why it's framed out. We're going to look at the pole push instead of the leg kick push in timing just for double polling. That's why it has a bit of exception there. All right, let's go to the next slide here. All right, back to this report card and the kind of scaling process. So basically, we have a scale of 1 to 5, where, as you see here, 5 is supposed to be top World Cup level skiing. Is basically this is how what we want to see, and 1 being a clear limitation. It's probably not going to be a lot of 1s out there, but just to be clear, 1 is not necessarily that you haven't skied your entire life. So like you have to maybe you set a little bit of where this scale starts, but I'm basically talking about you skied before, the athlete is just not hitting the mark at all. So I'm not talking about someone just skiing for the first time in their life. This would not be, then you would use this, if you're having athletes or you're having course with people almost haven't skied before, never skied before, use the principles of the theory behind here, but it's too early for them to actually be kind of evaluated with numbers in this case. It's all kind of 1, if you know what I mean, right? It's off, but you're using kind of, okay, let's start with the power position. It's A, right? It's the most basic position. Let's try to move our weight from our heel split forward and so on. I'm just saying you can apply this knowledge and these theories, but you don't necessarily grade a beginner here. That will be a little bit overkill in my opinion. Anyways, 1 to 5 scaling. And this is how I would go by. I would always start with A, B, B, C, C. If you have under a 3, meaning a 2, I don't think you should go to the next one and even grade it. So let's say someone is sitting so much that I'm giving them a 2 or even a 1, but let's say a 2 for power position on double polling. Sitting would be a very typical one, or maybe extremely forward lead with totally straight legs. That is what we're working on. There's no need to go to power line or anything. Like we need that athlete to just understand a little bit more what position they're going in. So we need at least a 3 to even move to the next one is my recommendation. As soon as you have a 3, or hopefully obviously a 4 or a 5, you would then go to the next one and all the way to C, hopefully. And obviously there will be a lot of green here after, if you have an athlete on a really high level, a little bit more, maybe some red and some yellow for a bit lower level athletes or developing athletes. Maybe it was a bit a nicer wording. Let's see here if I think, did anyone, let's see here. Yeah, the next bit is actually me giving an example, practical example of showing this with a video and understanding how I'm kind of grading and how I would use this. Before I do that, which might be not the most logical time to do questions, that might be after, but still, are we keeping up here? Is something very, very unclear, or have I kind of contradicted myself without really paying attention or anything here? Is anyone having any question at this point before I show an example? Seems good at the moment. That's great. Obviously, it'll be a bit more chat part and not just a monologue from me coming basically from this point on in this presentation after I kind of gone through an example video.
Eric,
So
do
we're
you
going to
mind
show.
if I take, sorry,
Yeah.
do you mind, Eric? We're having an issue with about 4 or 5 people still not being able to get access to the report card. Do you mind if we take a 2-minute break? I need to stop sharing my screen to be able to do that. If we can just take a 2-minute break, I'll be very quick to try to get that to everybody. And then we'll come right back and get into the video. I just think it will be more beneficial if people have it in front of them.
No, I think that's perfect. Just if someone just to say that before we break out, then if someone don't, we will go back and forth a little bit and show this. But absolutely, it would be great to have another screen where you can kind of see this in your own pace, both the video and the report card. So let's take a couple of minutes here, and yeah, we'll be back in a couple of minutes, I guess, Julie.
Thanks, guys. 2 minutes. Okay, I think I've gotten most of you. If in the next minute or two you don't have it, just again, pop me a message in the chat below and I'll see if I can send it along again.
What are they missing, Julie?
Just the actual report card itself.
Gotcha.
Good. Okay. Let's get back to our regularly programmed schedule. Regularly scheduled program.
Well, even for a second, maybe you just show the technical report card again in the not in the presentation, Julie, but just in that spreadsheet. There you go. Thank you. So just that being said, the point being, if you just put in the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in different spots, Julie, randomly, and just press enter. So basically, the whole point is that it's just to get a bit visually bit more simple to see how this kind of fills out itself. So the whole gray part is obviously going to be filled up with plenty of colors here as you fill this out. It's just when it's blank, it's a bit more easy to look at. But so that's basically how we kind of combined colors and the number system that I saw someone discussing in the chat briefly. Anyway, so I'm going to now go through one athlete just in double polling and how I would rate that athlete. And we're going to look at that video together. Our experience is that when you show video on things like this, it's way more choppy out there than it is like on the screen of the presenter. Meaning that's why we sent out some of these videos beforehand. We're now going to look at what was listed as video number 1 in what was sent out earlier. I guess you also have the link on the screen right now. A bit hard to click on, but you have it there as well. We are going to show it. I'm just saying I would now recommend having that available on another screen so you can see it smoothly at least, even if the presentation seems a bit choppy picture when we show it. So yeah, we're going to look at Catherine. So we're going to look at Catherine on the treadmill. This one, exactly. So let's just start with playing this. Yeah, I have it as well in my other screen. I'm not the host here, and I see it's super choppy, but it's still good to have that as a reference point when I'm kind of referring to, but to have this on your own screen. So basically what you see here is normal speed for a few seconds from the side, about 10 seconds. Then you see the same athlete, the same clip broken down into 20%, 25% speed from the side. Then you soon, we will see that athlete from behind in normal speed. And it will then be slow motion also from behind. So you have normal speed side, 25% speed side, normal speed from behind, and 25% speed from behind to kind of hopefully get a good picture of how this athlete is skiing. I know very well that roller ski treadmill is not something everyone can just have available. That this will not be necessarily how it looks for most of you when you're filming it. I think it's good for us to use this today to kind of look very carefully at what we're looking at. But that's obviously not how it's going to look for every single time you do this outside. You're going to do this filming and they're going to pass you, obviously. I know that, but I think it's meaningful for the exercise today. Anyways, first things first, we are looking at A, on body position. So we're starting with looking at the power position. And if Julie, if you are able to it's probably easy for you if you do it on the slow motion, perfect. When the pole tips are approximately a little bit underneath her, so maybe about there, maybe a split second later, but you try to get the tips underneath her, or potentially you have a pretty good just before what I would call, yeah, that's a little bit too far. So yeah, around what we're seeing. So basically what I said, we're looking perfect. Oh, yeah, let's just do that. Late on in the power position right there. So basically what we are looking at here is trying to have an angle both in your ankle, your knee, and your hip, trying to create upper body and lower leg pretty much the same angle. Now, for the sake of me having filled out this before, can you try to get it a split second earlier, Julie? Just because I have given her a pretty high score, and it looks like they're not a little bit uneven here, just because we're a bit late. Can we get the polls a little bit further earlier? Yeah, let's just more. There we go. Thank you so much. Again, they will never be perfectly aligned, but is this athlete sitting? Not in my opinion at all. I think she's nicely forward leaned. Even her heels is a little bit lifted, not necessarily, but it's obviously a sign that you're not at least having your weight on your heels. Forward leanness of her upper body and lower legs is relatively much the same. I would give this athlete 4 or 5, and I would actually just say a 5. This is not her limitation. This looks like a really good starting point as a position for this critical time during her cycle. I would basically give this a 5. We would then move over to the pole plant, right? So you can probably just keep on playing it again and again from the side, Julie, mostly on from the side still. And basically what we're looking at is that last few seconds, split seconds leading into that pole plant is the pole's kind of ready to go and vertical a little bit before she has to set it down. So she has full control over that timing and moment right there before it's kind of set down a little bit later on, which is probably come, they're not in the ground yet. Let's just start and stop faster. Yeah, you can probably do that on your own screen as well, basically leading into that pole plant. So are we seeing there that she has plenty of time in front of her? Is her poles kind of ready to go and be set down? Let's keep it from the side for now, Julie. Is her poles kind of ready to go and she has in full timing kind of control over leaning forward and the poles grabbing her in time, or are they kind of coming from behind last minute? I would say she has plenty of time, kind of perfectly going into the pole plant as she wants. The position we see on the screen right now is basically before the poles actually hit the ground. And as we can see, the poles are ready to go. They're vertical, they're there, and she is now probably going to start moving her hips, ankle, and knee a little bit, kind of crunching down, getting into that power position we just looked at. This timing looks really good to me. I would probably here as well give it a 4 or a 5, and let's just go with 5. I'm giving myself a hard case here on purpose. This is a really good athlete. I would say that's a 5. All right, we move on to B, and we're going to look at power line. So we're going to look at her from behind, Julie. So the last half of this video. So probably curious now, a couple of you, on what we're looking at, because obviously power line is quite maybe obvious on what we're looking at when we're looking at you're standing on one leg. We are usually looking at the nose, knee, toe. Well, obviously here she should, unless there is something I missed in what is ideal double polling, her alignment should probably be nose straight in the middle of her knees and then straight in the middle of her toes. So that alignment is not the same. So what are we looking at here? What I'm looking at is, in double polling, is her poles actually set down straight, or is it more of a V position or upside down V position? Is those poles more of an ideal power line set down and push through, or is it a bit of a V position that some athletes do because their hands are too narrow in front of them? Or for some athletes, maybe even that's an upside down V, or a normal V where you kind of set the poles pretty close to your boots, but your arms are quite far out to the side. So that's the alignment we can see. What I think Catherine is doing is actually having a bit too narrow hands in front of her. So even when you kind of play this and just keep playing it here, I think her kind of a little bit on upside down V in that pole set down, and she actually have to kind of make her hands go a little bit out to the side to pass her hip. She's setting down her poles with her hands a bit more narrow than her shoulders and her hips, creating this little bit of an out movement she has to do there. So I would probably say that it's not like far off. So I would at best give her a 4 if I'm really strict, maybe even 3. But for power alignment, we're not looking at that much in this technique other than that. So I would let's say, if I'm being nice, let's give her a 4. There is something to go on here, but it's not drastic. I've seen people having way worse kind of upside down V's than this, but a 3 or a 4 would be my kind of take on that. It wasn't the straight down pulse. Next one, leg kick push. It's now our timing on B. We just did B on body position. Well, obviously, again, we're not looking at the pull, the leg kick or push here. We're looking at the push of the poles instead, and kind of breaking that down a bit more thoroughly. I think she sets down her poles quite kind of determined, but she's not smashing them into the ground. So I think, and then I think she's through that power position, really pushing force into those poles. And I would say that we have a pretty ideal power line going on here. And I would say, so I'm pretty happy with what she's doing. She might be kind of finishing this entire movement a bit too far back, which will come on the ski lift, which is pole lift in this technique later in the body position C here, it kind of linked. So she might be kind of following through a little bit much in my opinion, but her leg kick push, which in this case is pole push kind of power curve we were looking at in the theory earlier on, that is in my opinion pretty ideal here. I would maybe give her a 4. Now over to body position C, which is called ski lift. Again, we're looking at pole lift for this technique. This is where I think this athlete, Catherine, has the most to go on. So if you freeze the moment, or try to freeze at least, Julie, as best as you can, when those poles are leaving the ground, trying to kind of find that exact time. Then, yeah, that's pretty good. Thank you. I think she has stayed with the ground for too long, and I think she's sitting too much. I think, just so that's being clear, obviously, when you're starting your pole plant, you are on your toes, or your kind of front half of your foot on your body weight. That will roll through the foot, and you're kind of mid-foot, maybe even a little bit towards the heel when you're ending a pole push. That is totally normal, and that's fine. However, I think she's done that too far here. So I'm not saying you're not ending way further back on your foot on the when you're ending the pole push in double poling, worse when you're starting it. But I think she has kind of gone too far back, and this position is a little bit too city, for my opinion. I would be a bit more critical here and say that this would be what I would really focus on for her. I would give her a 3 on this one. I think that she could be able to kind of end a little bit more mid-foot balanced and not having this kind of straight down in her boot lower legs. That's totally fine in itself, but her thighs, actually, you can see, are kind of, her hips are very far behind her heels, and I think it's too city. I think it's too far back, and it's a bit of a challenge then to get back into the right repositioning. Other kind of recovery phase now will be challenging to reposition yourself before the next pole plant. So this will be where I would be the most critical. This exact moment is too city for me, at least for this level. It would be a 3. Last part is basically in entirety everything that's happening from this picture until the next pole plant. So the recovery phase. Obviously, it's kind of how you kind of have to then decide a little bit on yourself, is because I now put down her pole lift position as not ideal, will I then also punish her for that in my ranking of the recovery phase, which is where you start the recovery phase? So that will be obviously something of just something you have to be a bit consistent on yourself, I would say. I'm planning not to, so I'm kind of planning, is she kind of doing that repositioning, that recovery phase as good as she can to kind of get back and having that pole plant timing that we're looking for. Earlier on for pole plant, I gave her a 5. So I'm really happy about how she's managing to make this recovery phase actually work out. So if I'm not punishing her for something that I put into the category of pole lift, I will give her a 5 here as well. I think she's getting back quite nicely. We see it especially from the side. So I think a side view is a little bit better here, maybe to see for that recovery phase part. And I think she's kind of finding a way to get her poles quite fast back and having that preparation phase where she can time perfectly the next pole plant without any rush or stumbling forward. So after a too far back or city ending, to city movement ending that I punished her for in the pole lift and gave her a 3, I would say her recovery phase is up towards a 5. So overall, this was an example of an athlete on a really high level, and that's what you're going to get next example. That's setting the bar high here, but I gave her basically like a 4 to 5 on her power position. That's the body position A. I gave her a 4 or maybe a 5 on the pole plant Yeah, let's do my most critical ones. Let's do 4 there, 4 for timing A. And then we go body position B, where I will give it a 4. And let's do leg push there. I would give it a 4. I would go up and give it a 3 on the ski lift. And I would give it a 5 on the repositioning or the recovery phase part. It says repositioning phase to this left there. I'm sorry about that. We have changed terminology recently, but I'm meaning the same thing. So again, an example of small details that we discussed that is we're trying to nail this so it's the most accurate. So something like that. Some of these could obviously be tipped over to a 3 or tipped over to a 5, but ish what I think what we just saw is represented in these numbers. And this would be how it looked. And obviously with Catherine in this case, I would probably start thinking about that position where she's ending her kind of pushing phase or pulling phase, and so this, the pull lift, and see if we can get that up to a 4 or even a 5, obviously. All right. What we're going to do now is that we're going to break you guys into groups. So hopefully all of you, or at least most of you in that group, have gotten this email where you see all the videos. We just looked at video number 1. We're now going to look at video number 2. There are 3 videos here, so if you don't see the numbering, we have 2 videos on the roller ski treadmill, 1 female and 1 male, and we have 1 on snow. We're now going to look at the male athlete on the roller ski treadmill, if the numbers have been confused, but it's linked as video number 2 if you see the same as me in the email. You're all gonna, first of all, just if you don't know each other, maybe tell who you are and what kind of group you're working with in your day-to-day coaching life, what kind of level that is, maybe to explain to the others where you're coming from and what kind of technical work in the daily coaching life. And you will look at this video and you will go through ABC and ABC body position and timing together and rate that video basically. We'll come back in groups. No, we'll come back from the groups. We'll discuss and see if we're are we on totally different planets or are we overall-ish agreeing on what's going on? And if we're not, super exciting. Let's kind of discuss why we ended up with such different numbers. So that's what's going to happen now. Julie, anything else? We're going to use 15 minutes, by the way. So you have 15 minutes to go through this in these groups. Julie, anything else you want to say about before we break in here about anything for that part?
No, just I will put you guys out in some breakout rooms. The rooms will be led by Eric Brodden, Robin McKeever, Eric Denice, and Yulia Istgard. And then this is the first time I'm doing this other than a test drive run about an hour and a half ago. So bear with me as I get us through.
Any questions before I leave here? I'm not leaving, but I'm not going to be in every group, obviously. Any questions? Anything unclear about what will happen here? Looks good. Okay, have fun in your groups.
Eric Brodden, you need to join group 2. Joanne, there should be something telling you to join room 4, and the same with Stefan.
Yeah, I'm not gonna take part in the exercise. I just wanted to attend as an observer.
Well, you can observe from room 4. Otherwise, there's not a lot of people in that room.
Okay. Can you send me there again? Because I clicked on not now.
So Stefan. I'm
Oui.
gonna, I'm going to go put you into room, I'll say 3, and then I'm gonna move you out of room 3 into room 4. It's the only way I can do it right now.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll bump you from one and into the other. Did it ask you to go to room 3? Joanne. Jojo.
I just sent you a message, Julie. I'm just gonna pass. I just wanted an understanding of the language and concept. So yeah, that's
No,
okay.
Yeah, of course it's okay. Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't a mistake on my end.
No, not at all. Not at all, Julie.
How
Thanks
are
for
you finding it? How did you find it so far?
good, good. My husband's helping me understand the language a bit.
Nice, good.
Well, he's got more of a ski background than I do. So
Well,
and-
maybe he wants to go in the breakout room. No?
Sean, you want to join? No,
No, I'm
he's
not-
good. He's good.
I like, yeah, it was nice to be able to listen through it.
Yeah,
Awesome. Okay.
but thanks so much.
Oh, God, no worries.
Thanks, Julie.